So someone finally said what I think y'all have been meaning to say. And,
So I have deep resonance with this creator's experience of being the crisis friend, and they've been having this discourse on their TikTok for a little while now about the experience of being the crisis friend. But I think for myself, I'd also like to bring on the nuance of how to support the crisis friend as somebody who now has a healthy community of love and care that does support me as I navigate the channels of taking myself out of the systems that precipitate crisis in my life. My name is Vie Darling, the Cosmic Queen and your intergalactic interpreter. I am the pioneer of cosmic wellness, which is a spiritual practice that is founded upon spiritual abolition, which is a form of shadow work that centers decolonization of self and our relationship to spirit in order to support us in the co-creation of a life worth living. And hi, I've been the crisis friend. I'll tell y'all a little bit about my experience before and after. I grew up in a community that was not supportive at all of my well-being and wellness. That is to say, I grew up in an extremely abusive family situation, surrounded by narcissistic personalities, being the black sheep, being scapegoated constantly, and I was constantly crying out for help. I was constantly reaching out for help, specifically online, because I didn't know what else to do. When I would tell people, especially adults in my life, nobody did anything. People would actually just gaslight me and constantly take the side of my abusers. Even still today, I see that they are still doing that same type of behavior to people of the younger generation and to each other. I moved away when I was 17. As soon as I got the opportunity, I moved to New York and I tried to not look back, but I was very much enmeshed and I cared about these people. Y'all have heard me talk about my experience growing up and like the background that I come from. I've spoken about my background before, so I don't need to get too much into it, but I do need to say that I grew up inheriting intergenerational trauma, not solely from being black in America and in the world, but also because of civil war that devastated my family directly and also very publicly. Alcoholism and drug addiction, and experiencing poverty because of that. Do note that my parents grew up as millionaires and I grew up experiencing serious poverty. That's all the perfect foundation for the chaos that proliferates throughout the life of the crisis friend that creates the structures for that. On a microcosmic level of my personal experience, all the way to the macrocosmic social causes and factors that perpetuate chaos and crisis. I finally got sober fully in 2020, but I had started getting sober in January of 2019. I am sober in recovery, folks know that, and I have been able to develop a community of people who actually do have the tools to show up for me and be of support. One thing that I've realized over the years is that bottom line for me, like, absolutely, if you are not trauma informed and committed to decolonization, we cannot develop an intimate relationship, platonic, romantic, familial, whatever. We can't. Because it means that you're not a safe space for me, you don't understand me, you're not capable of having compassion for me on a human level, and there's no reason why we should be in a relationship if you can't even treat me with human decency. Folks also know that in March of last year, my childhood best friend condemned me and like went on this character assassination campaign against me. She'd been talking trash about me like since before that, which she admitted to me. But like then she told me basically like, you're a grown woman. She misgendered me. You're a grown woman and you're constantly in crisis. What's wrong with you? Completely castigated me, completely disrespected me, and all because I told her like I was going through a situation that was out of my control that jeopardized my housing, and all I asked was if you could possibly share my GoFundMe, and you couldn't even do that. So I don't feel comfortable being in relation to you right now because I'm deeply hurt. Perhaps down the road, but not right now. the things that she said to me were beyond disrespectful, and I can't be in a relationship with somebody who has the audacity to talk to me like that, even if they apologize. But it made me realize something that I'm super grateful for. She was a relic and a totem of the past, where I didn't have any other option but to be in relation to people who were ill-equipped. Either they were not able or they were simply not willing to be of support to me in the ways necessary for me to develop out of being somebody who was in a constant state of crisis. I'll tell you what, the moment that I cut off my family of origin, 90% of my crises, 90% of my stress, 90% of my anxiety went away. And most of the things that I deal with now are just cleaning up the remnants of my past. This person, honestly, we talked like maybe 3 times a year. She knew about like when my roommate, it turned out, was stealing our rent for 4 months and we were getting evicted. These are the kinds of things that she said were my fault. She knew about that and never ever bothered to check in on me, never bothered to say, hey, how are you doing? I'm gonna pray for you, none of that. But here's an example of the life that I live now. About 2 years ago, when my aunt passed away, I was in a really bad spot, emotionally, mentally. It was really hard for me. And it catalyzed the consciousness shift that ended up with me going no contact with the majority of my family of origin. At that time, I was in a place where I told people in my community, because I have a trauma-informed community that is committed to decolonization, I knew that I was safe to tell them this, but I was like, yo, like, I feel like I'm either gonna relapse or I'm going to, trigger warning, unalive myself. And my people showed up for me. People brought food, home-cooked meals to my house. I got super sick in that time. People ordered me groceries. But more than anything, 2 of my friends were like, V, like, we can do all of the spiritual work that you want to do. We can do all of that. But what I think you really need is you need to start working with a therapist and you need to get on antidepressants. I know that as first-generation people, like, there's a stigma against getting medical help, but you need to. Your life and your sobriety, which is your life, are on the line. And they supported me through that entire process. I went to my general care practitioner and for my yearly checkup, and I just told her the truth, which was that I was like depressed and experiencing ideation. And she immediately prescribed me antidepressants. I told another friend in my community, and she connected me with a service that I was able to get really top quality therapy that was accepted by my insurance. I love that therapist. Like, she is the best therapist I've ever had, and she has helped me to heal so much. And today, like, even though we can identify that last year and the year before it was one thing after the next, I also have people in my life who have been able to say, V, I know you and I was with you through that time and you did the best that you could. Like, you did all of the right things. Sometimes the universe throws these things at you and you're doing everything to get out of those patterns and out of those systems and out of those structures. You're doing all of the things. Like, you need to be easier on yourself. V, you need to give yourself self-care. V, you need to have compassion for yourself. Like, I see you. That's not something that I got in my life before. And that is critical and foundational to healing enough to not be the crisis friend anymore. So if you're not willing to be able to support people who need your help and help them to find practical solutions, then yeah, just don't bother with them, because you are simply an impediment. You are a liability and you are a weakness in their life. If you actually love and care about people, you will show up and support them, even if it means that you have to do a bunch of research to unlearn and then learn how to be a support. That's what people who love and care about others do. Hope that helps. Happy hunting. I want to just bring up a point that I don't think I really spoke to about the whole crisis friend thing in my last TikTok, and that is this. That whole thing is situated within the context of colonialism. So it's heavily racialized and definitely gendered. Being the crisis friend, being the woke killjoy. All of this comes from the apathy that people of privilege have towards people who their privilege ultimately oppresses. I didn't say this, but the person that I talked about in the last TikTok is ostensibly a white woman. So let's just think about the optics here. Let's step outside of the situation and look at it from the outside in. This white woman who grew up upper middle class in a wealthy suburb with two parents who loved each other, healthy relational dynamics in their home life, never has ever had to worry about money or housing or anything like that, has not experienced like abuse, CSA, any of that kind of stuff. This woman decided to shame me for the effects of situations that were out of my control, macrocosmic in my personal life and my upbringing, and microcosmic in that sense, and macrocosmic in terms of the colonial structures that make progressing out of suffering and struggle harder for me than it would be for someone who is white or, I don't know, came from a background of having money. Now just think about that for a second. And I noticed in the original poster's comments that it's usually white people, specifically white women, who are commenting about the crisis friend. And the original post that inspired that TikToker's entire discourse around the crisis friend was a white woman. Another example is these two white queers in my BFA cohort, 222 on the timer. One who I considered my friend, and the other was just somebody that I was in this program with, and that was it. And I tried to get along with them, but they are so racially violent in subversive ways that are also very much class coded that it was just not possible. So we'll call the person that I was cool with person A and the other person B. Person A comes from a similar background to the person that I talked about in the last TikTok. And they have very good awareness around their privilege and social structures and stuff like that, which is why I was able to continue fucking with them for as long as I was. But they would share very openly about their mental health issues, about their emotional issues, especially as it related to our being in this very rigorous academic institution. And I feel like I really showed up for them and supported them through their issues. As far as person B was concerned, that was totally fine. They were besties, in fact. But anytime I even superficially talked about how I was feeling, if I was experiencing any kind of difficult emotion or challenging emotion, anything that wasn't like peachy keen hunky dory, it was a problem. And if I ever went even a little bit into that, it was always like I was oversharing or doing too much. My feelings, no matter what, were always a problem. But this other person who, white, upper middle class, you know what I mean? None of that was ever an issue for them. Step outside of the situation, look at the optics of the situation. I mean, that person B also disrespected me OD on a number of occasions. They were incredibly entitled, really super problematic, and also violent towards me socially because they were jealous of me. Listen, if I were me, I'd probably be jealous of me too. But as a white person, it's your responsibility to check that shit so you're not acting on it and causing me, as a black person from a disenfranchised background, harm, since you want to say that you're about solidarity and whatnot, right? So once again, even if I wasn't actually talking in depth in any capacity about challenges that I was facing, especially challenges that were outside of my control, I was framed as the crisis friend. This is black sheeping. This is scapegoating. I was always the problem in that cohort, regardless of how complacent, how much of a doormat I was, how much I let slide, always a problem because I was in a very racist institution at that point in time. But this other person could speak freely about any and everything, and it was fine. This is very common in white queer spaces. Any space that is adjacent to or centered on pleasing whiteness, like, that's what you're gonna expect to see. And that's why I don't exist in those spaces anymore. I don't exist in those spaces anymore. And people want to feel bad about it. I don't know what to tell you. Do better. It's already hard enough being the person who's in a crisis, because trust me, those of us who are in crisis don't want to be. You have no idea how many times I would cry and ask my higher power, ask the universe, like, when is it gonna end? Especially in early recovery, because like I was finally seeing and dealing with all of the bullshit that was all around me that I had been using substances to ignore and to just get through the day. So that crisis friend shit that y'all are talking about, it's very ableist. You are ableist, and you're probably racist, and you're probably classist, and you're probably a misogynist. And that's one thing that, like I said, can't fit in TikTok comments, but it's something that I felt was really important to name about, or name within this discourse around the quote-unquote crisis friend. I deserve to not have to be strong on my own and within myself. Mind you, that friend that I talked about in the last TikTok literally told me one day when we were hanging out in the woods, like the summer before we ended our friendship, that she wished that she was a strong Black woman. Like, she said those words out of her mouth to me. And I was like, literally don't ever say that to anyone ever again. Like, I'm your friend and I love you, and I understand that, like, you didn't understand that that was problematic, but don't ever tell anyone that ever again. So you see why I had to end this friendship. And of course, what did she do? She attacked me. She attacked me because she knew. I deserve to not have to be strong. I deserve to receive the kind of support that I give to others in my life. And I deserve to have a community that shows up for me and supports me as I go through the shadow work journey to recover and to heal and to move out of the lifestyle of chaos and drama and crisis. But it really does start within. It starts with me understanding that, like, if I'm in systems and structures that are built to oppress me, and if I'm around people who internalize and operate from those structures, I'm not gonna advance. So it requires me divesting from those kinds of relationships. And I'm just gonna say my camera went off because I got 10% battery. And I think that that just speaks to the fact of how draining it is to be basically doing your best, treading water, trying to get your head above water, and then you just have people around you who are pointing at you and blaming you for the fact that you're drowning when you were just tossed into water and you don't even know how to swim. Meanwhile, those people are calling themselves your friends and expecting you to show up for them in ways that they're not willing to show up for you. Especially if you are a Black person, an Indigenous person, or a person of color, you need to get away from those kinds of people, especially if they are white. I do self-sovereignty coaching. If you want to book a session with me, you can, but that's kind of besides the point. I just feel like this is something that's really important. It took a really long time for me to learn, and I just want to impart that upon folks. There's nothing inherently wrong with you. It's important to understand the systems and structures within that you exist within, and then figure out how to divest from them and to get out of them. And that is your responsibility and that is your duty, but you don't have to do it alone, and you shouldn't. I love you all truly and deeply. Happy hunting.